I'm Dave Weed. I'm with the Soames Heritage Area Project, and I'll tell you more about that and give you some literature that you won't have to hold in your hand for right now. But this is an opportunity to learn a little bit about not only I think the oldest known burial site in Rhode Island. Okay, that's why this is part of the month-long cemetery tour project. But if you turn around, you will see the same view that the Pokanoket people saw when they chose this site as a burial location. And we're at a little better day, and particularly if it were late in the day and the sun was setting, you would understand why this place was chosen. Let's go back a few million years. There wasn't any water here, okay? In fact, the ocean was out 3 miles or so beyond Block Island there, and any of the settlements, native settlements, would have been in that location. They're now underwater, so we don't know much about them. But then something happened about 20,000 years ago. Anybody remember? We had some ice here, a huge glacier that came and covered this whole area. It's a mile high of ice here. There wasn't any river here. It was just ice protruding out into where the Atlantic is now. Gradually, as that ice began to melt about 12,000 years ago, it began to recede. And as the ice melted, these rivers formed. So certainly by the 1500s, this river would have been here, and the ice would have been gone, and people would have been coming here for centuries. Okay, as the Pokanoket people say, since time immemorial, but we know certainly that over the last 12,000 years, they follow the coast and follow the animals here to hunt. And eventually, as grass and then trees grew in, they found a good place to settle here. So this was an ideal place to live because not only could you hunt animals, but you had a source of food right here in the water. And that meant that people could live here quite comfortably. They call this area Soames, S-O-W-A-M-S. Okay, it means the southern area, and if you look at the map, you'll see that we're in the southern part of this piece between the Taunton River and the Moshassuck River in Providence. That was their territory that they called Soames. And of course, over time, what happens is people pass and they need to bury them. Well, if you're out in the woods and you want to bury somebody, what are you going to run into if all you have to dig with is a clamshell hoe? What are you going to find? Roots and rocks and every imaginable barrier to digging a 2 or 3 foot deep hole. So you look for a place that has sand and gravel. If you were to dig in those holes over there, that's what you would find. It's just sandy soil there. And as we'll see when we go up there, this provided sand and gravel for a whole bunch of projects that were done here over time. But going back to when the Pokanokets were here, you've heard the name Wampanoag, I'm sure. But Wampanoag was a name that didn't go into use until the King Philip War, and it was used just to describe the various tribes that joined with Philip in warring against the English. Ironically, the Wampanoags and Mashpee, who never fought in the war, who were on the side of the English, have adopted that name, even though it was really the name of the other tribes. In any case, the tribe that has always been here is the Pokanoket tribe. Their Sagamore and Sachem live in Barrington, and there are about 300 of them that live in the area now. For the people here, this was an ideal place for a burial site because of the sandy soil and the view looking southwest. You buried everyone on their right side looking toward the southwest because your soul is going to go to the southwest. Yeah, the Narragansetts, though, were on the other side of that peninsula over there. That's Barrington over there. But it's not until you cross the Seekonk and the Providence River that you get to Narragansett territory. So you didn't want to bury the dead overlooking your enemy. You wanted a straight shot out to the southwest. So that's why the burials were here. And I'll describe a little bit more about the burials when we go up the hill. But I did want to point out, if you haven't looked at this already, and it's online on the same site, this is a picture of what Water Street looked like, kind of long before we moved here, but this is around 1900. It's just a dirt road. In fact, it didn't connect for quite a while. The Bridge Street did go down, but Water Street didn't connect with it. And there was water about where that car's turning there. There still is water there. Every time it rains, it fills up. Okay, but that's give you some idea. And then you will see on the left-hand side a piece of a mound, a sand dune, if you will, a good 30 feet high. That was where the parking lot is now. So we're going to learn a little bit more about what happened to those dunes. But if you take yourself back to 1900, you see that there wasn't a whole lot here. One little beach house. We're not sure if this house is one of those that were moved down there, but there's a whole series of small houses there. I'll also point out, we're talking about Charles Carr when he dug up 42 grave sites here. This is the Providence Journal article about that, and it's there, and if you go online you can read the whole thing. There are also pictures of some of the burial items here that were taken from this grave, and then the marker that we're going to go to now. The last thing I'll point out is this depiction of Usamequin, or the Massasoit Usamequin. Usamequin means yellow feather, Usamequin. And he was one of a whole line of Massasoits, the last one of which was his son Philip. It's the last Massasoit. They've retired that name. They're not using it anymore. But it simply means great leader. It's like president. The English were kind of confused when they probably couldn't pronounce Usamequin in the Algonquin tongue. So they went with Massasoit because they could say that word. And they acted as if that was his name. It wasn't his name, it was just his title. So that's why I always say the Massasoit Usamequin. Okay? But this is a painting done by Ruth Major. She's an artist I found out on Martha's Vineyard, who was kind enough. I got money from the Warren Preservation Society, and we purchased the painting. It's now at the George Hale Library, along with another painting that we commissioned to of a winter settlement out near Margaret's Cave. Any questions on what you're seeing here? You bundle up enough and ready for a walk? Okay, I'll pack up my equipment and we'll head up the hill.
These hills were original?
Yes.
Okay.
And the thing that what most people, when they see these mounds here, the first, what do they think happened there?
Some kind of Indian mound.
Indian burial mounds, like that you see in the Midwest. Okay, these were not constructed by native people. These were sand dunes blown up from the water that have been here all along. Okay, so okay. Well, here we are up on top of one of the mounds, and you can get a view of this whole area here. And what I want to point out is that all of this area that you're looking at used to look like this. Okay, this was leveled in 1924 by the town of Warren to make a park. That's after the extensive looting that went on for not quite 100 years Um, when the railroad went through, the embankment you see back there was dug in 1851 to make the Providence, Warren, Bristol Railroad that ran both ways, obviously, back and forth, and brought hundreds of people down here to work in the mills. That helped to populate the area. Many of the houses were built once the railroad was here because there weren't any automobiles at the time, so to get anywhere, the train was essential. And it really was quite a successful business, and in some ways I wish it were still operating. It would be a lot easier for us to get to Providence, especially now with the Washington Bridge out. But so that actually ran until the 1950s. Okay, yeah, producing, of course, a lot of soot and smoke and noise and everything else. But it was largely used for freight in the last 20, 30 years because once cars and trucks were able to go back and forth, nobody wanted the train anymore. Okay, so that's how progress goes. So that railroad track sat empty for years. We moved in. My house is that White House just to the right and up of the shed there. And when we moved in, there were no railroad tracks, but the railroad bed was just abandoned there. And 1993, I think it was, they built the bike path that now is on the railroad bed there. And has anybody ridden on any part of the bike path? Yeah. Nice, isn't it? It's 14 miles, goes from Providence all the way down to Bristol, and it's just been very popular. So that's where the railroad bed sat for years, and as they constructed the railroad bed, they needed sand and gravel because there are places like further south there, the land goes down, but you need to have those railroad tracks level. So they just simply dug out sand and gravel from this area. In the process of digging the sand and gravel, however, they found skeletons in unmarked graves, had no idea who they were, didn't think they were English because you wouldn't just bury somebody randomly without marking the grave. So they didn't quite know who they were. Some of them speculated it was people, enslaved Africans, but when they found one skull with straight hair, they realized that wasn't right. So it remained a mystery for a long time, though many speculated it might be Native American people who were buried here. Well, that continued for years after the railroad was built, and more things were taken, and along with the skeletons, they found all kinds of burial objects. Ceramics from Holland, pottery from England, metal tools and things of that sort, which also seemed strange to them because the English wouldn't bury those things with people. Nobody knew. In comes Charles Carr, who starts working as the first librarian here in 1898 at the George Hale Library, who was an amateur archaeologist. He finds out that people are finding things here and becomes very interested. He goes around asking to see what people had and collecting and paying for things, and then eventually got so tired of people taking things over and over again as they dug more gravel to fill in potholes in the street and things of that sort. He got permission from the railroad company who owned the gravel pit and asked if he could dig here, and that's what he did. So he began digging right along this whole area here, okay, this flat area, and found 42 grave sites, some with multiple graves, one grave that had 6 skeletons in it, okay. So there was a large number of people here still, and at the time in 1913, the idea was that you protect those burial items by taking them out of the ground and putting them in storage or in a museum. So he thought he was doing the right thing. Well, today we understand that's not the right thing to do. And since 1990, with the federal Native American Gravesite Reclamation Act, it was illegal to do that. And furthermore, tribes had the right to reclaim any funereal burial object as their own. And that's exactly what began to happen in the 1990s, that 3 tribes in the Mashpee area near the Cape decided to, because they were federally recognized, decided to go to 3 museums. Obviously the George Hale was one of them. My wife was director there at the time. Then the Haffenraffer, which is was in Bristol, now has been moved to Providence. And then the Hay Museum of the American Indian in New York City. So that's where things had been dispersed, and that's where they went to collect those items. And they got over 600 items. Of course, many of them were just little beads and things of that sort, but everything they could find that they could get reclaimed. And then in 2017, they came here, had permission from the town. The town came, and the pictures on the website, they've had a backhoe here and dug a pit and put in a 10 by 10 foot concrete crypt. Okay, there's a picture on the web page, and put that in the ground, and then in a private ceremony with only tribal people. I was here at the time, but they wouldn't let me participate, obviously. Several hundred people gathered in a large tent here. They came up here, reinterred all those items, including what we think was the remains of the Massasoit Usamequin. Why? Because they had found in one of the graves that had been dug up a copper chain necklace that was described by Ed Winslow in 1622 in his book Good News from New England as a gift that they gave to Usamequin, so that when he wanted to communicate with anyone in Plymouth, his runner would take the copper bead necklace with him, so that they knew in Plymouth that this was the real deal. This wasn't a Confederate trying to pull something over on Plymouth. That copper chain necklace was removed from one of the graves here, along with a part of a blanket, a red horseman's coat, also a gift. So it's almost absolutely certain that that was Usamequin's grave. He would not have given those items to someone else. He, in fact, had died in 1661 in Brookfield, north of here, 15 miles north of here. Because this was his home, they carried him back from Brookfield for the burial, the initial burial in 1661. He remained here until Charles Carr dug him up in 1913, and then came back in 2017, and now is buried under the monument that you see behind you.
Were there any bones of him there?
We don't know. The Mashpees have released some pictures of some burial items, but nothing. They would not like to have pictures of human remains. That's a violation of their notion of respect. Many of the graves, the bones had deteriorated. Remember, they weren't in coffins. They were just a couple of feet underground, and in ideal conditions, bones will last, but mostly they deteriorate. We're talking 400 years, so not going to last long. Other questions before the rain comes? And we'll go back and take a look at the monument then.